As we begin, well, I guess it's the last day of 2017, but in the month of January, we're going to lead into this idea of a series called A Work of the Heart. And over the last several months, I've been working with the staff in this idea of how the heart works, and we describe it in the context of relational disciple making. And as a church, we're vested in this idea of relationship, of relational disciple making, life change, heart work. And in doing that, we invite you into relationship with one another. We invite you into relationship with God. And we know that God does his work in each of us. One of the great challenges for each of us is that as we enter into this type of relationship with God, that oftentimes we've learned so many other things in life that we come into this relationship with Jesus that oftentimes we transpose what we think we know over that relationship, and it oftentimes doesn't allow the heart to get affected by what God is actually doing in our lives. And so as you reflect on 2017, and if you just take a moment and you think about 2017, there are some things that have happened to you throughout 2017 that have changed your heart or molded you or in some ways disrupted you and have changed or altered relationships, and some of them have ultimately changed or altered your relationship with God. I mean, simple things that have happened in this culture. I've only lived in Nashville area for it'll be 2 years in February, which is hard to believe. But this last year was the year of the Nashville Predators, which, as a guy that comes from Minnesota, to see hockey in Nashville was one thing, but to see it embraced like it was in Nashville was impressive. And what happens is, for sports teams, people invest their hearts, their emotions, and it shows. I mean, I haven't seen so many bumper stickers for a team ever, I don't think, and I've been around for a long time. But the idea of giving our hearts or something to a sports team has its ups and downs. I mean, they win, they lose, they go to the Stanley Cup. We all know what happened when they went to the Stanley Cup Finals, and there's a disheartening part of them losing because we've embraced them. They've captured our hearts. And so with that, also, you know, there's other things that happened culturally that, as a nation, we had a change in president in 2017, which has changed the heart of our country in many ways. It has changed some of who we are, and for better, for worse, however you look at that. The political question is not on the table, but the idea of a change in leadership often changes the heart or the feel, and it impacts us. And I don't know if you've ever gone through Financial Peace University. We held it here in September and October this year. And if you go through that process, Financial Peace University is a course that basically teaches you how to handle your money. And if you go through it and you, for lack of a better term, drink the Kool-Aid and digest it and allow it to affect your heart, and you come out and you realize that the principles work and they change your life, you become the evangelist for FPU, for Financial Peace University. You naturally talk about it. It overflows out of your heart because it's changed you. It's changed the way you live. It's similar to talking to a Predators fan. It's changed them in some weird way. They love the Preds, so they talk about the Predators. You talk to the Titans fans. They're a little anxious today because they need to win today. I'm surprised that any of them are in this room because it probably starts. Oh, wait, it's a late game, isn't it? Is that right, Nick? It's a late game? Okay. That explains it. Because we are connected to those types of things. See, I'm a Viking fan, so I'm a long-suffering fan of a team. There's heartache that goes with that, and if you, never mind. So that's the idea, that every human being on the planet lives out of the overflow of their heart. They live out of their heart. They don't, if you meet somebody and you begin to recognize who they are, what you're beginning to recognize is their heart. And there's expressions of the heart. And in that expression, we begin to recognize what God is doing in us. So when we become followers of Christ, when the Spirit of God comes into us, our spirit comes to life, our heart is transformed, and we begin to go down this process of reflecting who Jesus is. We get transformed. And that is more of a submission to God than it is a striving after God. I think that's where a lot of this gets confused for us as followers of Christ. We often want to strive, but it's actually more of a surrender. And if we begin to understand that, we begin to understand the work of the heart. And the work of the heart is threefold. It's a threefold thing that we as followers of Christ need to kind of wrestle with. So if you're taking notes or if you want to take notes, these are three things that we all have to do, understand, be aware of. And the first is this: how self-aware are you of what your heart is presenting? In other words, are you aware of how you live affects the people around you? Because it does. The simple idea of driving to work and going to work and getting there on time, and that whole experience is predicated along a lot of things, especially if you live in Nashville and you have to drive any distance on a Monday morning. Sunday is great. I work on Sunday. Sunday's no problem. But there's a number of things that come out of the heart of a person that's commuting into Nashville, and it's part of their routine. It's part of how they live. It's part of that whole thing. And so if they leave on time and they hit the road at the right time and they get to work on time. But if one thing goes wrong, and sometimes it's not even predicated upon them, sometimes it's predicated on the person that got in the accident 2 miles ahead of you. It is predicated upon a flat tire. And then the overflow of the heart begins to reflect who we really are. Because when we're in our routine, and our routine is going normal, and it's going as it should, we have a tendency to be people who present well. But when the routine is disrupted, and you get a flat tire on the way to work, you may cuss. Or not. I know I would. Because that's aggravating. And it reflects something outside of my purview to control. And so I begin to present my heart in such a way that is different, that is, okay, so maybe you won't cuss because you're too conscious of how that looks, but in your heart there's turmoil. In your heart there's something that wants to express itself, and we're good at suppressing those types of things. But at the end of the day, the interruption of our routine is often the way that God gets the attention of the heart. Because our routine is, by nature of a human being, designed to keep the life as normal and predictable and controllable as possible. And we worship a God that says, it's not really supposed to be that predictable and controllable, because really He's the one that's in control. He's the one that is ultimately keeping our routine the way it's supposed to be in our minds. And when it's disrupted, we often turn to God and say, how did my routine get disrupted? When in reality, we should turn to God and say, wow, that revealed something about me. Those are two different things. And so with that, I want to just share with you a passage. It's found in Colossians chapter 3, and I'm going to start reading at verse 12. It speaks to the heart, and the heart is being shaped, and it's being shaped in these three ways, and it's revealed in these three ways, but it's being shaped by our emotions, it's being shaped by God Himself, and it's being shaped by our relationships with others. And so listen as you hear these words, and if you want to follow along, they'll be on the screen. It says this, beginning with verse 12. So as those who have been chosen of God, holy and beloved, so the followers of Christ, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. He's talking about the heart. He's talking about the heart in such a way that it's revealed, the condition of the heart is revealed, compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Obviously, the opposite of that would be a lack of compassion, a lack of kindness, pride, a lack of patience. You get it. So, verse 13, now it moves into this relationship with one another, bearing with one another and forgiving each other. Whoever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, so also should you. It is rooted in this idea that we have a relationship with one another and we should lead within that relationship, just like Christ leads in our relationship with us, is that it leads with forgiveness. Verse 14, beyond all these things, put on love, which is the perfect bond of unity. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ richly dwell within you with all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another with psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with thankfulness in your hearts to God. Whatever you do in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks through him to God the Father. This passage is about putting on a heart. This passage is about revealing the heart. This passage is about how we live out of the overflow of our hearts and how it, in essence, impacts other people. One of the ways that you can see the condition of your heart, or really anybody else's heart, is that over long-term exposure of people to you and in relationship with you, how does your heart overflow into theirs? How does your heart overflow into the lives of the people that are closest to you? If you want to know the condition of your heart, that is one of the most revealing ways to know. Now, if you don't want to know the condition of your heart, don't ask one of those persons close to you, because ultimately they can reflect to you probably most clearly what you overflow the most. And for a lot of us, we're not aware. And so one of the keys for understanding a work of the heart is to be self-aware, to be aware of the condition of your own heart, to know that it is constantly overflowing in some form or fashion. Now, you can fake it sometimes. That's true. You can fake it. But you can't consistently, over a long period of time, fake the condition of your heart. It comes out. And if you take the time to reflect for a little bit on 2017, or even longer than that, if you go back, you begin to see your relationships. You begin to see how your heart overflows into people's lives. And that will give you a good indication of how your heart's doing. Also, what you're going to find is that your emotions give you an indication as to the condition of your heart. If your heart is filled with worry, then worry is what comes out. If your heart's full of anger, then anger is what's come out. If your heart is filled with stress or strife, or you begin to reveal that. And if you're not self-aware of that, you just go through life being angry, or you just go through life being bitter, whereas the opposite of that is, the transformation of that is, and the idea of what Christ is doing in us and the work of the heart is the revealing of the peace of Christ dwells in us, and it's revealed. Love is revealed. And that's a supernatural thing. And oftentimes, when we hear that, we think, oh, I got to do better at that. I got to love better. And so we strive to love better. It doesn't work that way. I'd like it to work that way, because what we want to do is be in control of something that ultimately God's in control of. He's the one that transforms the heart. He's the one we surrender to. He's the one that reveals these things to us. And these are the things that we, as a body of believers, need to be aware of and working on. And the last thing, it's reflected in our worship. So it's reflected in our relationships with one another, our heart is. It's reflected in our emotions, and it's also reflected in our worship. And what I mean by worship, it's this idea that we begin to express what God has done in our lives. And we say it every week. We say, go love and well. Loving well is not a duty of a believer. It is the overflow of the heart of someone attuned to God, aligned with God. And that is an act of worship. And when we are reminded of these truths, our hearts naturally are inclined to worship. Our hearts are naturally inclined to go, oh, that's right. I belong to him. See, but what happens is we have a tendency to create our own normal. We have a tendency to create our own version of these things. We have a tendency to want to go through life with as much evenness and normalness and lack of interruption as we possibly can. And what ends up happening oftentimes is we begin to worship our routine, we begin to worship the things that are of this world, and our heart is given to them. is given to what is most important. We call it creating idols. The heart is naturally a worshiper. It's naturally going to gravitate to something. And we, by nature, as human beings, worship. It's what we do. We worship something. And we're all discipled by something. You are being discipled by our culture, by our world, by God, by your friends, by you name it. You're being discipled. The question is, are you aware of where you're being discipled? And are you aware of what is discipling your heart and shaping it? That's why I'm asking you, as of 2017, as you reflect on 2017, how has God and what has happened to you that has shaped your heart? For me, that's easy for me. As I look back on 2017, I had a granddaughter born in July. Oh my goodness. Talking about heart shaping. She stole my heart. And there's a relationship that's just 6 months old, but it's heart changing. And reordering of priorities and changing of plans and all of those things. So my routine becomes different because now I have a granddaughter. Things are different. And you can see that God interrupts and exposes and makes me aware of my own heart issues. But again, I just want to remind you that it's the three things. I'm going to ask my friends to come up and visit me here. Come up and join me. We're going to talk about how some of these things have affected their lives. But just a reminder, your heart, you are living out of the overflow of your heart. All of us are. And so out of the overflow of the heart comes our emotions. So our emotions are revealing the condition of our heart. Our relationships are revealing the condition of our hearts. And our worship is revealing the conditions of our heart. And so as we talk, we're going to talk a little bit about just some current circumstances, some things that have happened in our lives, so that you can hear how God is shaping their lives, my life, and maybe trigger for you something that you go, okay, I can see God's hand in the shaping of my heart. And we're going to begin with Susie. Susie Lynn joined our staff less than a year ago. And she's in spiritual formation. So this is right up your alley.
I'm in spiritual formation.
Yes, you are. You are being spiritually formed. And your life has been changed in the last few months. Something you anticipated, but yet something that drastically changed your life. So you want to share with us a little bit about that?
So when I was 5 years old, my mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And so for the past 37 years, her health has deteriorated alongside that, having that illness with her. And so I'm an only child, and I grew up with that. I grew up with, becoming some form of a caregiver, as early as middle school. And I'll never forget the day I was about 11 years old when my grandfather said to me, we were driving in the car, I remember exactly where I was, and he said, you're going to have to take care of your mom one day, and it's up to you. You're the only person that she has that's going to be able to take care of her. So what I have learned this year is that I have sort of lived my life out of that space where I have everything in my life I've lived as though it depends on me, and it's all up to me. And if I don't do it, no one else will. I'm the only one who can. I'm the only one who should. Those kinds of things. And so it's really affected my relationships. It's affected the way I've worked. It's affected the way I've done ministry. But this situation, my mom moved in with us on November 14th. So I have 4 kids. They're 16 and under, and a great husband, and a job that I love. And so it just felt like a lot all at once. And as the years preceding this, leading up to this, I've prayed often for God to find another way to do this differently. And it was earlier this year when I was looking in the book of Matthew, and I was praying, according to what it says, to ask and to seek and to knock, and ask and it shall be given to you, knock and the door will be open, seek and you'll find it. And I was like, come on.
I'm praying.
And it occurred to me that I was probably asking for the wrong things, and I was seeking the wrong outcomes. And I have become very self-aware that I am a total control freak. And I'm super self-aware that I lack trust in a sovereign God, because one of my greatest struggles in life has always been trusting God for financial provision, for whatever it was, for college, for a wedding, for life, and now my mom. And so I began to think, maybe I'm asking the wrong thing. And so I remembered Jesus in the garden praying and asking God, Lord, let this cup pass from me. Father, let this cup pass from me, not my will, but your will. And so I thought, okay, I've been praying for the cup to pass from me, and it's not passing. So God, if this is the cup, I'm going to need some chasers. And so I started asking for the chasers. So I was like...
They got that.
They
got that. That tells you a lot about this crowd.
They're my people.
They're your people.
So I began asking for the chaser of provision financially, the chaser of people, like community. We moved here 2.5 years ago, and we left a very strong community that knew me, that knew my mom, that I grew up with. And so I asked for the chaser of community, the chaser of grace, the chaser of patience and hope and all these things, because I was totally future tripping in terms of what was going to what these outcomes were going to be. Like, my kids are going to be resentful, my marriage is going to fall apart, and I'm going to have to quit my job, and I'm not.
Okay.
And like all these greatest fears were coming up, but what's happened is, God didn't let the cup pass for me, but he has answered. He's given me the chasers. Mm-hmm. He has. And even more, so much more than that. And so I've been thinking a lot about that verse too in Colossians 3. And my tendency is to go straight to the put on, because I want to do something about this. I want to make it. It depends on me. So I need to be more compassionate. I need to be more patient. I need to be more loving. Well, all of that striving and all of that desire is birthed out of really a feeling of not being enough. And if I'm really honest, then I would say I'm not compassionate enough. I'm not patient enough. I'm not loving enough. I'm not at peace enough. I've been a Christian for however many years, and I should have peace. And so this feeling of not being enough, that's where I go to, where really it's not about doing and putting on all those things first. The first thing that passage says is that you're holy and beloved. So because you're holy and beloved, you can put on all this stuff. And like you said, it's an overflow. It's not a striving to do more. And loving well is not a duty or something that you muscle up and do. It comes out of the overflow of knowing that you were loved well, and that you are loved well, and that you are holy, and you are beloved, and you have everything that you need to be compassionate and patient and kind and loving. And this week, because this is all happening in real time, this week I kind of came to this realization that doing something well, doing this season well with my mom, doesn't mean doing it perfectly, because God doesn't expect me to be perfectly patient and perfectly compassionate and perfectly kind. None of us are like that. And so doing it well looks a lot different in his eyes than it does my eyes. And so I want to control the outcome. I want to know what's going to happen. I want to know that my kids are going to be okay. I want to know that my marriage is going to be okay. And really, God is the author of their story as much as he is my story. He's the perfecter of their faith as much as he is my faith. And I thought this story was going to be done with me, but it's now part of their story too. And I can't control that. And that's really, really hard for me to not be in control.
Yeah. So the primary emotion that comes with lack of control would be?
Fear.
Fear.
Total, straight up, from the pit of hell, fear.
Right. but then that being self-aware of that fear, and as it presents itself in the desire to control, you can see the work that God wants to do in your heart.
Yeah, and I have a lot of really good theology in my head. It just has a lot of trouble working its way into my heart and out. And so, I really have, what was told to me this week was that when you live with somebody with a chronic illness, it often mimics like living with someone with an addict. So you become very consumed by the circumstances and what's happening with that person and the needs, and you want to make everything okay around it. But that Colossians passage talks about thankfulness. And so what I'm trying to do now is rest in the thankfulness and the gratitude of like, man, I have this group of women that I decided to lead a study through the year with, and I asked them if I could lead them, and they've been leading and carrying me. And, my father-in-law has been an amazing example of what a father's love is in terms of provision and knowing us and knowing what we need and generosity and kindness and support and love. Like, I've never experienced that before, and just the people that he's brought around us and the doors that have opened, from becoming friends with a nurse at Vanderbilt who opened all these doors for us to see the right doctors. And I mean, like, there's so many great things that God has shown himself as faithful and good that I wouldn't have seen had this not been the case. Right. So, yeah.
He's really disrupted your routine.
He's totally disrupted everything.
Yeah. Right. So your new normal then becomes a faith walk.
Yes.
And the sculpting of your heart.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know about all you guys, but sometimes I feel like I'm still learning the same lesson, like over and over and over again. And I'm tired. I want a different story. I want to graduate.
Sam and I have graduated.
From this.
Yeah.
But I see what I see God doing is, it's a depth. It's a deeper still. Yeah. And it doesn't feel good.
No. But it is the natural condition of the human heart to go to what is normal to them. And so why we keep relearning over and over again is because it's our natural bent. It is our natural place of comfort. And we want to go there.
I want to be comfortable and secure and happy
and we
all the time.
Right. Okay. Steve's not here, is he?
He is.
He is.
He's very aware.
Okay. All the time. Yeah, don't we all? Thanks, Susie. Aaron Spellshouse is working with our Serve ministry. He also is going to kind of migrate into leadership development this year and help us with that. And this last year, we've just gotten to know each other. And in our meetings, in our conversations, talking about discipleship and different things, you revealed something to me, and we had this conversation. And why don't you share a little bit about that conversation?
Yeah, so the conversation went something like this. Kevin, my relationship with God is not where I want it. I've been through a really hard season, kind of trying to pick up the pieces and don't know where to go from here. So, do you have any thoughts? And like any good teacher does, he responds with a question. What do you think you should do? I was like, have no idea. And so I thought back to, okay, well, routine. What have I done when I've felt close to God? Well, maybe I should start getting up early and reading the Word again and praying and, serving and whatever, just doing all the things that I know I'm supposed to be doing. And you looked at me and you're like, I don't know if that's what you need. I was like, what do you mean? Then what do I need? And you didn't really give me an answer. And I mean, as we've talked about it, you didn't think much about the conversation, but it's something that really sat with me. And what I think was going on in that moment for me was I had this thought that if I just did enough, then God was going to love me. And if I wasn't performing to a certain level, then I wasn't really in his care, I guess. And as I sat and thought about that for a while, I had this analogy or vision come to me one day when I was just sitting there. Imagine myself on a lake with a boat and just rowing. Like I'm in the middle of the lake, just rowing as fast as I can, trying to get to the shore. and am just exhausted and realize I'm getting nowhere close to where I'm trying to go. And I stop and I look up and I see that I have a sail. And so I take the sail out and I set it correctly. I catch the wind, and then I just felt in that moment like this, just like lowering of my shoulders, this relaxation of, oh, I don't have to continually strive. If I can just be aware and listen to the voice of God, he's going to propel me on. And that brought an incredible sense of freedom to me to go, it doesn't matter how well I perform today, God still loves me anyways.
Yeah. Your idea of discipleship and the way that you were kind of trained in discipleship had a basis to it. How would you quantify that versus what we're talking about now?
Yeah, so what I feel like I had learned from discipleship was that it was just a curriculum you were given to right living. You know, if you did these things and you could check off these boxes, then you were doing right. Even though I think in my heart I knew it wasn't right, it was the routine that I knew. So when we had that conversation, it was like, okay, well, let me go back. Okay, yeah, if I do these things, then I'm good.
Right. So we have a tendency to revert back. Mm-hmm. We have a tendency to want to go back. So you almost have to unlearn some things that. So what for you in the emotion of that? What's the emotion of saying, okay, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this instead? Or what is the primary emotion of I got to move in the striving? What's behind the striving? What drives the striving for you? Is it fear or is it?
Not sure. I might have to think.
Okay, think about that one. Because underneath that moves you to striving, that's the one that'll push you back into old routines. And so the heart moves in such a way that wants to drive us there and not towards God.
I think I would say it probably has to do with worthiness.
Worthiness.
You know, if I think back to my life before Christ, I lived a pretty crazy life and didn't think that I, pretty much felt like for the longest time that I had to spend the rest of my life earning God's love because of all the crap that I had done before.
Nobody in this room has done any crap ever before.
It's all right.
Yeah.
Good for you guys.
And so it's realizing that that's forgiven.
Yeah.
See, that's the true part that oftentimes we get lost in our hearts, is that could he really forgive? And then the accuser comes in and says, no, you're not worthy to be forgiven. And so then you have to create this artificial version of yourself to be worthy to be forgiven. Mm-hmm. And then it starts playing itself out in striving. And then that's, it's, I better read my Bible more. Well, and what she said, it's not how much you know. It's really the connection between that and your heart. Because if it's how much you know, we're all in trouble.
Yeah, I think something that's been key for me too is the difference in knowing and understanding. Mm-hmm. I can read and know, but understanding is where it really starts to take place in my heart, when I can really start to live it out. I think that's the key mm-hmm. difference.
Yeah. That's hard to do,
yeah.
Especially if you've kind of lived in a behavioristic idea of what it means to follow Christ. If I just look the part, then I must be the part. When in reality, it's what underneath, what's motivating you to do that. He's not going to love you or me or you any more than whether we're good, bad, or indifferent.
Which is so interesting that passage uses the words "put on," mm-hmm. like you're putting on compassion mm-hmm. and kindness, and it's what's on the outside, but it's the inside is that you are loved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's it.
There's no but
mm-hmm.
at the end of that, no if, which is awesome.
Or
qualifications. Right. Surrender, yeah. This is Sam Barnhart. He's our care pastor, and he's been through a life of interesting transitions. Yep. And as he has reflected on it, and we've gotten to know each other over the years, we've gone from being in a band called Bleach to being a manager of Rocketown, to being a youth pastor, to being a creative arts pastor out in Seattle. You planted a church in Chicago, and your wife is a saint for following you through all of those things.
Yes.
And if you're Catholic, that's not what I mean. Yeah.
It's like,
Although
it's
close.
like the Trinity and then Angela.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so like, that's how
Okay, right there, close.
Real close.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bless her heart. But Sam, you went through.
That was very southern.
It was.
That's not
It
good.
was.
Bless her heart.
I said y'all earlier too, and I was
Yeah.
like, "What happened to me?
You know you're down here.
What has
When
happened?"
you type that into email and it
Yeah.
autocorrects to, you have to spell it right, y'all right.
Oh, okay. Is there a right way to spell
Yes,
that?
there is.
Okay, we digress, Sam.
Sorry.
And we
Smooth
often
on.
do.
That's right.
But in those transitions, you went through some huge heart work to move from, touring with Bleach to going into the. So share a little bit of what God did in your life.
So from like 95 until 2004, 5-ish, I was on the road. And so all of my, from college until I was 31, that was the only life that I really knew, especially as an adult, as a career. At 31, like years old, God started to change us and transition, like really all of us in the band at the same time, that it was time to put this down and to move on into something else. And it was, it was hard. It wasn't like, we had to hang it up. We were in a good place, but it just felt like I was changing direction. And so at 31, I'm retiring from this career that I had, and I was pretty terrified. It's like, what's next? I'd went to a Bible college, which is where we met, Kentucky Christian University, and so there was definitely a season of trying to understand kind of and to hear from God, and a lot of times it felt, I don't know if you've ever experienced this when you're going through that, but just like God was almost silent in that, and I just had to learn how to stop and rest and kind of be still and know, that He is God, and but at the same time, the fear was screaming pretty loudly, and so so it was a definite process for me, of learning how to trust God in that, so.
And your transition into the pastorate was multifaceted.
Right.
And multi-places.
Right, so, and it's cool to look back and see how each step of the way God was preparing me for what was next, and the things that I was learning from each thing that I had done. And then, right before I came back here, we had planted a church in Chicago, and that was a huge faith step, probably one of the biggest, for sure, in our marriage. And we happened to get pregnant with our third child like 8 years after our last one. We thought we were done, and it's like, oh, no, you're not. We got one more. So we were birthing two things really at once, right? A new baby and then this church. And with church planting, I didn't realize until I was kind of getting into this process more like, it's not free to plant a church. There's a lot of expense in that, And so I had to raise about, the budget was about $300,000, and I had to raise about $150,000 of that. And, I had no idea. I'd never done fundraising, didn't know what I was getting myself into. So again, that fear kind of creeps up. But it was cool just to see how God used all the relationships from Bleach, and then from being in a pastor in a couple different places, and how God used that to really begin to plant this new church where I was at. And so it's cool to see how God used all of that, all of my past, to just make it work in my present. So
So fear being a driver, maybe not a driver, but
it can be.
And
depending on if we're healthy or.
And you've been through multiple transitions with this fear. What do you do with it? Where does it go for you?
Usually right to my head, and I panic, right away, like, oh my gosh. At least for a little bit. I've had to learn how to get to a place of surrender with it, and just look over my story and go, you know what, like, in every step of the way, God, you have been faithful. Right. You've been trustworthy. That's really not. I'm not trying to give the Sunday school answer.
Right, you're not being
really
trivial.
What I've seen God do.
Fear.
Right.
Fear is the absence of faith in God. I mean, it's the same thing she was talking about with control. If I can just control this, the fear will go away. the reality is that you can't control it,
Right.
so therefore it's out of control. And unless God speaks into it and you trust God with it, you're going to be afraid.
Right. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
just,
and all of it, I think in all of it, you can see there's a control piece
Yeah.
to this, right? When
Right.
something is outside of our ability to change or to
Right.
to direct, like, it's scary.
yeah. And it's one of the hardest things to do is when you're afraid is to surrender to the bigger power.
Right.
Because we want, the natural inclination of the heart, and this is where why do we relearn everything over and over and over again is because of the natural inclination. I'm afraid I'll take control
Yeah.
rather than surrender.
Right.
And therein lies the shaping of the heart. So God keeps giving you opportunities to be afraid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which,
Well, and
I'm
it's
like you,
also, I mean, it's pride. If you even peel back that layer even
Yep.
further, it's pride. And, you know, God loves a broken and contrite heart. And he loves us so much that he will break us to make us contrite.
and then we strive to get it right, which,
Dang it.
dang it. So you might have thought, I don't know what you think, and I don't know what you think about your journey, and not really sure what you think about how God is going about shaping your heart. This is you heard four people standing before you that say their hearts have been shaped in a number of different ways.
I would say we're all slow learners.
Yeah,
Obviously,
well,
right?
yeah,
Like
right,
it's a process.
And I'm older than you guys. So
way
there's-
older.
Yeah,
dude.
I know.
Way, not even
So
the same.
so I'd like.
Grandpa.
Yeah, Grandpa. So I'd like to say, it gets better, but the reality is it's if you're trying to be self-aware and you can catch it earlier, it's better. Because as I've gotten older, I get to relearn things over and over again. But in a way now, I've been able to recognize what's coming, and then to be able to recognize what's coming, I can surrender quicker and get chasers along. Yeah. So it does wonders for the heart. So, but hey, thanks for sharing your story with us, you guys. And we're looking forward to. I hopefully got to know them a little better, and that's part of the goal. But also, just we're all in a journey, and we're all learning things, and it's a heart-shaping life that we're leading, and we're doing it together.
That's right.
So, thanks, guys.
Thanks, man.
So I'm going to ask the band to come up. And as they're coming up, I want to tell you that we are going to have 3 songs. And while they're doing those 3 songs, I'd really like you to kind of reflect. You heard three stories. One, a long-term story of consistency of God working in Sam's life. You heard the current circumstances of Susie. You heard how a conversation was prompted change in the life of one of them. And for me, just the introduction of a new person into my life, a granddaughter. It's heart-shaping. God's shaping your heart. He's revealing something. And there's a consistent something in all of our lives, that presents itself in emotion. It presents itself in many different ways. And what I'm encouraging you to do as the band leads us in a few songs is take a moment and reflect. Ask God to reveal how he's shaping your heart. What is the lesson you're learning over and over again? What is it that he wants you to change about what you believe about him? Because really at the root of our heart is we believe something wrong about God, because ultimately fear is the absence of faith and the trustworthiness of God. Worry is not trusting God. It is trying to be in control of something you were never intended to be in control of. And allowing God to be God and you being surrendered to that person who is. And he is so trustworthy. And the last song we're going to sing really speaks to this idea. And I encourage you to sing from your heart when that comes about. And know that we worship a good God. We worship a God that has your best interest at heart, better than you have your interest at heart. I know that's hard to fathom. I know it's hard to believe that if you actually surrender what you believe to be your best interest to a God who has your best interest, it works out better. I know. It really does. So take a few minutes. If you're new to Journey, just relax in the moment. Reflect on God. Reflect on 2017. Reflect on what he's teaching you. And allow him to speak to your heart. Because he will. He's here.